need to have any clicker, you don't need to do anything, you just flow. So who has a computer? Who touches who touches this? Is this one? I think so. So maybe I could do that. See, and I don't need to time it, right? I just let it run, right?
If you put the 20 seconds in the presentation, by the way.
Well, supposedly we have checked this. Can I get who's my helper? You?
Yeah.
You mind? You can get to sit in the table here. Yes? And you just take care of this, because I'm going to go find a seat. There are judges in the room. Everybody says a judge, of course. After 5 talks, we will have a bit of a conversation, discussion, then we continue to the next one. When you're ready, you signal to Jack.
Jack, I'm ready. He's already done. I hope so.
Is Jack ready?
He's already done. I hope so.
Is Jack ready?
When you're ready, hit the sound.
Just click in presentation mode, Jack. It will show up there.
The problem is it's not in the screen.
Presentation, Jack. Just click in presentation mode and it will show up there.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jorge Torre. I am the General Director of NGO, the name is Comunidad Universidad.
Is this high enough?
Like that?
Yeah, not in your beard, but just about here. Yes.
Like that?
Maybe not.
My beard?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Better?
Better, okay. Good. Okay. Again, Jorge Torres. I am the General Director of an NGO. The name is Comunidad Universidad COVID. And I'm going to talk to you about a leadership program that we started 5 years ago, more or less. And in 2011, Nicolas Gutierrez published a paper on leadership. And he said in Nature, very important magazine, and Nicolas is around here and also in other rooms, and he identified after 130 cases of cow management that leadership is the key ingredient for successful fisheries. And at the same time I was in a field work, and he's Noé, and I was talking with Noé, a fisherman from Vallequino in California, and say, hey, what do you want to do tonight? And he said, I have movie night. And what is movie night, Noé? And he said, I rent movies, nature movies, and I project in my garage, in my garden, to the kids of the community. And I said, so these guys are natural born leaders. And then science. So maybe we can start thinking in a capacity building program to provide leadership skills. Not the boring like behave yourself, save the fish. No. So we start a bunch of interviews to fishers to ask which kind of tools they want to have to be a leader. So we interview all 38 fishermen, we interview NGOs, academics, this is in Spanish, sorry, and this is some of the courses or classes that people were saying that would be good. So the fishermen, the NGOs, the government, and the academics. So we design a curriculum with in 3 phases. The first phase is the core phase and was about currents on leadership and common well-being, communication, negotiation, conflict resolution, and through this process was a coach, a professional coach coaching the fishermen, because we're women and men. These 2 guys hate each other for many years from the same community and were in the community, and they were in a negotiation and conflict resolution class. Communication, a bunch of exercise. Instead of, the classic class, save the fish, no, tools like in the MBA. I don't remember what is next, but the thing is, they were companion with this coaching process during the first phase. In the second phase, and also fisheries management legislation was the core, part of the core phase. So it's leadership, common well-being, communication, negotiation, conflict resolution, and fisheries management and legislation, because the fishers wants to learn about that. The second phase were more about, was 6 months later, about communication, more communication, how to manage projects, how to organize the organization, the groups. And the third phase, we did a course on participatory video. They produce their own videos, their own project. And this one, you will have for 40 minutes, because I doubled to have more time. So we did a profile development analysis. It's a tool, very powerful, to give you the kind of leadership that you are. So we did the test to the 50 leaders. We start with 20, at this point we're just 15. And this thing measures how is your decision making, high risk, are you outgoing or not, among other things. So this test, they present, we test, we give the results, so they can understand which kind of leader is this person, a shy one or outgoing. And one result very interesting, the ones that are really good in marketing were the outgoing leaders. The really good ones teaching the young generation and others were the shy leaders. So this kind of test that I highly recommend for everybody is good. It gives you a strong proof to these people. They did a bunch of projects, well, not much, each one of them present a project, from teaching classes about conservation, and this one, I really like it, is a fisherman that his project was to teach photography for the kids in the town. And these days, he and the kids, it's a club, they already present to exposition of photography. This is the perfect generation, common well-being was the main topic. And the second is a start last year, that the main topic was equal gender. And the lessons of this program is we need to give just the tools, different tools, so the fisherman can do, or fisherwoman, sorry, can do many other things. This is the second generation that is in progress. This is an exchange with all of them, and part of that we teach or pass the know-how to other organizations in Paraguay, in Baja California, and environmental defense. We give the know-how to do this kind of leadership courses, they adapt and they are doing their own stuff. And I really like, I want to finish with this phrase. I learned that being a leader does not mean being sitting in a Trump giving orders. That was from a fisherman Paino, how he just wrapped the whole process. And sometimes leaders think that is being a Trump. Thank you very much.
I know we need to leave, so why don't we take anyone has any question for Jorge? Because he's leaving to the other session.
I have another session. You know I'm going to be around for this question. Or you know it's Paco that he was with me and he knows a lot.
Okay. Very interesting program, of course. Thank you. Next, Miguel.
I asked him not raise the bar. No, no, yeah, working. Cool. Okay. So my name is Miguel Lorenz and I'm a PhD student at Memorial University, Canada, and I want to talk a little bit outside of the social science, but something that can be a tool to help to increase the social science discussion. Now, I'll talk about the rapid assessment of fishing boats that are, this looks like the same, but they are a bit different, right? We all know and we recognize that fishers in general and small-scale fishers in particular are very dynamic, diverse, and complex, especially dynamic. You know, there's a lot of stuff happening there and happening all the time. So, like I say, and I'm focused here in fishing boats. That's why fishing boats are part of the fisheries. I know we have like gleaning, we have all different types of fisheries, but most, and I would say most of fisheries happen with a fishing boat. So they are integral part of fisheries. And of course, they are not different from the rest. According to FAO, the global fishing fleet has approximately 5 million fishing boats. 80% of those are considered small-scale fishing boats. So that's a large majority are part of, integral part of the small-scale fishers. But fishing boats, and we talked about this during yesterday, today, fishing boats are changing as well, the fishers, because they are dynamic. Now, we can see here, those boats are not that different in length, but look how wide this one is. So there's something happening there, and we need to take a look at that. Every time we talk about management, a decision we make about fisheries, we need to make those decisions based on update information. We need to look at more stuff, not just general metrics like length and power of boats to do that. But of course, we know that especially small-scale fishers, because the nature of small-scale fishers, sometimes collect data for that is hard, because it's difficult, it's expensive, we don't have that time, and sometimes we are working with outdated data. That's because again, fishery is so dynamic that if you use data from before, it might be not relevant. So to tackle these challenges, I test a rapid assessment and a rapid assessment of fishing boats. So a way to get up-to-date information in a way fast, based on visual characteristics. That's why we can look at the boat and you can get information from the boat. For example, we can see if they have electronics, if they have an engine, make a class of power, and if they have hydraulics, which type of fishing gear they use, and the size of the hull, the type of the hull materials. All this information just looking at the boat. To do that, I test this in my case that was Newfoundland, where we have this in Canada, where we have 42 and 50,000 boats, which 87% are smaller than 12 meters. So according to FAO, most of the classifications, they are small-scale fishers. But they are just saying the boats are smaller than 12 is like enough. So I went around the island and I surveyed 233 boats and 22 different harbors. And I did all that in a couple of weeks. Newfoundland is large, but it was pretty fast doing that. And we're using this rapid assessment, we can come with like some general ideas what fishing boats are. For example, the average length for a fishing boat in Newfoundland is 11 meters. And I would say 87% are smaller than 12 meters long. But we can have more like which type of, if they have more specific information, the case was important to me. So that's rapid assessment is also, you can shape them in the UA. So like, if they have that, if they have a wheelhouse, if they have like a life raft or any kind of safety device or more. So we can get information that sometimes we don't have anywhere else. And using that, we can say, I can print a better picture of how a fishing boat in that place will look like. And you can say, well, most of them are between 6 and 12 meters. Most of them have hydraulics. Even the smaller boats, even the small boats in Newfoundland have hydraulics, most of them. So using all that, we can come with some insights. We can give some better information. For example, generic information, just saying, if you look at those fisheries and you say, well, that's a small-scale fishing boat, boats are 12 meters, that might not be enough, right? And also we can look at the technological aspects that might happen there or add any other characteristics important to you. And all this with a cell phone and just myself going to the harbor. And that means we can have a mobile, flexible, and cost-effective, and also time-effective tool to gather information to help our other discussions, right? And also, we might capture information that we're missing. Like, what happened here? Why they cut the tip of the bow of this boat off? And maybe that might raise questions for researchers. I say, there's something happening there that I'm not paying attention. So we can get some like other information, right? Of course, and this can feed the discussion, feed the management, and feed the managers. That's like maybe you're basing generic information that might not be realistic, but more up to date, and you can, or even old information. So that's a lot of discussion can come from this, right? I truly believe that integrating fishing boat characteristics into governance approach will help us to get more sustainable fisheries in the future because we can have better informed discussions, right? And that's really fast. I would like to thank you, TBIC to Ignore Memorial and the Social Science and Humanities Research Council in Canada for support my research. Thank you.
We do have time. We can take questions. Will you prefer that, or you wanted to wait till the next one?
Up to you.
Up to us. Anyone wants any burning question? Anybody? Ah, yes, please.
Hi. Okay, so that's a good question because Newfoundland have more than 4,000 boats, and I visit 22 harbors. Most of them have 20 boats. That's why the demographics of Newfoundland is a big island. If you look at the map, it doesn't seem that big. I drove in those couple weeks 5,000 kilometers. So just to visit those boats, because that's the way it is. So it's not really centralized. We can go just for the major harbor, but because it's so easy and pretty much cost effective, I pay for my food and gas, right? So I could visit 4 or 5 harbors in the same day and get information. And of course, I use an open source app. It's called Kobo Toolbox. It's pretty good. It's really easy to set up. So you can put all your questions there and works offline. So I just go there, answer the questions in my survey, take a picture of the boat, get the GPS coordinate, and save in my phone, got back to whatever you are, have Wi-Fi, send it to you to the cloud, and your data is saved there. So it would be good to like go anywhere, pretty much.
What was the name of that app? I missed it.
It's Kobo Toolbox. Was developed by a university, maybe? No, it's not BC, it's in the States. So a big university in the States with cooperation with FAO. It's pretty much was developed to emergency responders in like tsunami areas. So we need to go there, we need to get information to see what happened here. So they developed this app. But it's open source, so you can change it and do whatever you want with it.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's
Thank you.
move on. Next Rebecca.
Good luck.
You must have a waistband of some sort that you can.
I can just hold it.
Okay, that's fine. Just don't drop it.
Okay, I'm ready. Ready? Okay, there we go. So I want to talk to you today about, good afternoon everyone. My name is Borges. What I'm going to show to you is part of my PhD research, and I want to talk to you about spatial dynamics of mangrove crab fisheries in the context of protected areas in North Brazil on the Amazon coast, aiming for integrated management. So this is more or less my area where I'm working, north of Brazil, Amazon coast, and I'm focusing on 2% areas. So basically, you know, in spatial planning, marine spatial planning, everyone's talking about let's integrate management, let's integrate everything, right? And I was looking at the possibilities for the zonings of these two areas and thinking, okay, how can we integrate, right? So it's a big decision, it's a tough decision, because you have to think about, okay, you have a continuous mangrove belt, a lot of protected areas. Who are the protected areas that are relevant for the integration of spatial planning in these two areas? I mean, there has to be more than this, right? So I was thinking, okay, how to choose the protected areas that are going to be part of it. So I thought of another tough decision that I faced recently, which is I'm sitting there like checking in the line, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, where am I going to sit, right? Because who are the people that are going to sit next to me? I mean, it could be anyone. I could be, you know, sitting next to the toilet. No one likes that. Or, you know, near this area where they serve the food, it's really busy, loud. And there's several reasons why you want good neighbors, right? I mean, it's just a few hours, but so many things can go wrong. You want to be careful there. I mean, it could be a time also, maybe, I don't know, you're lucky and then you can be friends with your neighbor. I mean, you can chat and everything could go right. It's gonna show here. But in the end, I mean, all you want for these few hours is to sort of isolate yourself and do your thing, right? Like, you wish you could do that. Like, if people were like walking in front of you, trying to pass by, that would be awesome, really. But that doesn't work on the plane, and that doesn't work in real life for protected areas, for example. These areas, they are in a context. So in an ideal world, you will consider, okay, let's everyone hold hands and try to establish some ground rules for this integrated management, or for anything for that matter, like in terms of, you know, your neighbors. But again, you have to think about, okay, who are my neighbors? Like, imagine I'm on a plane, I'm like, this guy here is gonna show like a blue arrow, and I want to think, okay, who am I gonna talk to on the plane if I want to have, you know, like healthy coexistence, who am I gonna talk to? So, I mean, the person behind me, the person in front of me, the person next to me, it's tough. And it depends on the dynamics that are going on the plane. And the same is for protected areas, I thought. Maybe, you know, if you look at the dynamics, what's going on in these two protected areas, you can have a clue about, you know, who would be the protected areas nearby that you have to sort of engage in your marine spatial planning process. So I go back to the questions that I posed before, like, okay, you have, you know, a lot of neighboring protected areas. Some of them have overlapping zones, like buffer zones, you know, they are not just so nicely separated. So how do we integrate, like at which scale? And I thought, well, maybe Fisher's dynamics can give us some ideas. So the first thing that I did was I went to the field and I worked with an ecosystem service approach. That is, I asked people, okay, what is it that matters to you in this area? What is it that you want to really think about and manage? I mean, there are so many things, right? Carbon sequestration, you can think of, you know, aesthetic aspects. There's so much, but what is it that really matters? And in my case, in my areas, it turns out to be crab fisheries, small-scale fisheries. So I thought, okay, I'm really lucky because I like this subject. Let's dig deep into it. So I said, okay, let's focus on this and let's see where this can lead us in terms of marine spatial planning. Where can we learn from that? So what were we doing there? So we decided to, okay, let's talk to people. Let's do some participatory mapping. So we went there with maps, actually bigger maps than this one. This is another story I can tell later. But we had maps and we were talking to people, okay, show us on the map, like where are the crab fisheries? Where is it going on? Another thing, unfortunately I don't have a picture for it, but very important one, that we are working in collaboration with the crab fishers. So we actually gave them GPS trackers, and this is a work in progress, so we are still doing that. And they are helping us actually track the fishing routes. Another important aspect are interviews. So we did a lot of interviews because we wanted to learn more about other aspects of the value chain. So not only the harvesting aspect of it, but also trying to think about, okay, what happens with, what about processing of the crab? What about, you know, like other nodes further down the chain? And we ended up with this sort of messy map, but it really tells us out the dynamics and what's going on. So we could find out where the crab fishers are going to catch the crab, but also if there are crabs coming from outside, from other protected areas, into the ones that I was looking into at the beginning originally. So again, going back to my questions, which scale, like which protected areas are we going to engage for the spatial planning of these two that I was initially looking at? And I found out that looking at the fisheries dynamics, for example, the fishing grounds, the movements of the fishermen, it can really tell, it can give us some clues at least, like a starting point to plan for spatial management. So I just want to emphasize there's, of course, no one-size-fits-all solution. This works well for our case. Of course, you need multi-scale planning. So I'm not going to say that we found the perfect scale and that's it, and let's stop there. We tried as much as we could, to apply transdisciplinarity approach. Try to integrate social natural science, knowledge systems, talking to the fishermen, but also having this technical approach with the GPS trackers. And we want to work with them. So this work basically came from a demand from the fishermen to better match the practices and what's going on in the area in terms of regulations and laws. And we ended up finding out that actually not only these two, but we need to integrate 5 protected areas to make it comprehensive. So there's a bigger challenge ahead. And I think this is my last slide, and I really want to thank TBTI for allowing me the opportunity to be here. And yeah, thank you so much. If there are any questions?
Good stuff. Question? Not yet? Okay, we'll move on to the next one. We'll come back, we would have more time in the general round as well. Next up is Mandy. That's about all I know. But Mandy will tell us all about the rest.
Yes, I will. All of it. Ready. So I'm going to be telling you about a paper that I'm working on at the moment about traceability intervention in small-scale hand-line tuna fisheries in Indonesia. And I look particularly at the role of middlemen in organizing collective responses in these fishermen. The middlemen are kind of the first buyers and aggregators that buy the tuna from the fishermen. So transparency is increasingly seen by both private and public actors as the new way to have assurance that seafood is produced in an acceptable way, whatever that may be. And traceability, while it's not new, is seen as the way to communicate that information throughout the value chain and ultimately to consumers. So this is the space that we're looking, but we're particularly interested in the first mile and how such traceability interventions land there. But we know there is often a black box between assumptions of people that design interventions and what's really happening on the ground. And this is the space within which we carry out this research. Now, some of the assumptions that are held by interveners are that supply chains are organized in very linear ways, that intervention intervention failure or success is often a result of very structural dimensions and gives very static snapshots of why something went wrong. So we argue that there has to be a more dynamic approach to understanding how these interventions land in the first mile, which includes considerations of agency and also of situated context. And to do this, we thought that a sociological approach using theories of social practices would be a good way to do that. Now, theories of social practices is a bit of a complicated thing, but I'll try to explain it. It's about the shared and routinized practices of groups of people as opposed to looking at responses from the perspective of individuals making rational choices. So we look at social practices and how they're patterned across everyday life, both spatially and temporally. Now, in understanding traceability interventions, we're interested in how the traceability intervention de-routinizes the existing sets of practices and ultimately leads to different outcomes. And those, when we evaluate those outcomes from 2 perspectives, talking too fast, from 2 perspectives, the first thing is that we zoom in on the practices that are targeted by an intervention to really understand who is doing them, why are they doing them, how are they doing them, and then we also zoom out to understand how these practices are connected to other sets of practices around them, and looking beyond relationships between people to more material and other dimensions. And I apply this framework to 2 case studies in Indonesia, but I'll focus on one here, which is the fair trade certification of the handline tuna fishery there. And I look at how the traceability interventions are operationalized within the landing practices in North Buru Island, Maluku province in Indonesia. So Fair Trade USA is a certification and eco-labeling program that tries to reward socially and environmentally responsible small-scale fisheries by means of market access and a collective premium fund. Now, it should be noted that Fair Trade USA excludes middlemen from their requirements. They have a range of requirements, but I'll focus on the traceability ones and how Indonesian NGO Masyarakat Perikanan Indonesia MDPI operationalized those requirements, and particularly looking at how they were able to segregate fair trade from non-fair trade product physically, and how they kept records of all fair trade transactions throughout the value chain. Now, the first thing was to physically identify the product, and they asked middlemen to write with a permanent marker on the loins a specific code. But middlemen ultimately rejected to do this because this coding was perceived to slow down the pre-processing practices. Also because they were excluded from the fair trade certification, they did not feel it was their responsibility. However, then there ensued a negotiation process between MDPI, the fishers, and the middlemen, and it was ultimately agreed that the middlemen would actually be paid to do the coding, thus giving recognition to the middlemen, even though they were excluded from fair trade, but also reinforcing the relationships between fishers and middlemen, which are key in these communities anyway. So the second thing was that MDPI introduced logbooks, not only to comply with the traceability requirements, but to have broader data more generally. But middlemen rejected this because they did not like the format of these logbooks particularly, and it duplicated the efforts. Furthermore, some of the information in the logbooks was not information readily available to these middlemen, so they did not think it was their responsibility. To ensure that this data was being collected for traceability, MDPI introduced a transport note now, which is about the middlemen sharing information about the volumes of fair trade sent from them to the buyer. And this was widely accepted because the differences in records between middlemen and buyers is often a point of contention, that this intervention was assumed to kind of overcome these points of contention. And the final thing is that they introduced a mobile phone app to make bookkeeping easier and quicker, but this was rejected for technical reasons, but also because the payment and loan repayment was not matching to how this was traditionally organized. So the take-home messages are that middlemen do play a role in mediating traceability interventions, even though they're excluded from an intervention. And we have some 3 take-home messages that maybe provide new insights because we use this practice theoretical approach. Now, the first of these is that the material dimension of practices is key to how organizing responses. So the perishability of the tuna and the quality assumptions associated with that led to them resisting the coding intervention. The second thing is that fishers and middlemen historically have evolved in their practices and thus have specific functions in these value chains, also having specific skills and goals and meanings associated with that, which means that this has to be kept in mind by the interveners, that even though they're targeting fishers with some interventions, it's likely that sometimes middlemen have the capabilities to do things easier. And finally, what we learned from this middleman app was that the bookkeeping practice was actually targeted by an intervention, but ultimately it was a connected practices of loan repayment which really determined the responses to the intervention. So it's important to recognize all the different purposes for which something is carried out. Thank you.
Any questions for Mandy?
I have one.
Yeah.
What was, again, the problem with the smartphone app they used?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have time to go into it. So
Yeah.
the first thing was that there were issues with the internet connection in these sites, and then when they first piloted, there was a technical glitch which really determined the trust in the app as a main repository for information. And the second thing was the loan repayment. So loan repayment is often very informal, flexible, not written down precisely on paper. So the fact that this app increased the accuracy of the payment and loan repayment information went very much against how this is organized. It's also having it associated with a specific date. That's not how it's done. Having specific amounts is not also the most important thing in the
Thank you, thank you. Right. Now, who's next?
Me.
On program. Yes, Alba. Go, Alba.
Hopefully it will stay. Yeah. So my name is Alba Leon. I am a PhD student from the University of Vigo in Spain, and I'm going to be presenting the first chapter of my thesis. It's still an ongoing work. And I actually have one extra slide, which is this one. This one is not automatic. You have to go. It is that now. So there is an Indian story that talks about 6 blind men guessing how an elephant is by touching it. And they can get to an agreement as each man is touching a different part of the animal's body. Each man is describing a complex system based on their own limited experience. And that's because as humans, we have a restricted ability to deal with complexity. In fisheries, most small-scale resources are transboundary. However, management is usually done at national or subnational scales. And at each of these locations, we have a different level of co-management, which is a different involvement of the fishers in the management process. So this shared responsibility between the fishers and the administration is believed to promote a sustainable resource use. But most of the studies that discuss co-management, they focus on a single management regime or fishery type. So in my study, I discussed co-management across the distribution area of a species, and I include both artisanal and recreational activities to actually encompass the diversity at which small-scale fisheries operate. And I do this focusing on steak barnacles in the south of Europe. So steak barnacles, polythipes, is a benthic resource. They live in very exposed areas, and their odors are connected from France to the south of Portugal. And the management, so the odors are connected through a larval pool, a common larval pool. And the management is very different in the different regions. In France, the fishery is not of significant importance, but in Portugal and in Spain, it's a very important economic resource. So with this in mind, I ask, what are the levels of co-management for the steak barnacle across Europe? And is a higher co-management level related to a more sustainable resource use? So to answer these questions, I do a comparative analysis, a comparative study, and I divide the distribution area of the species in 9 case studies. So each case study has a common set of regulations. Here are the case studies. I have one in France, which is Brittany, one in Galicia, 2 in Asturias, one in the Basque Country, and 4 in Portugal. And I characterize each case study based on 10 key variables found in the literature to determine management success, such as quotas, or size limits, or access rights. And then I assess the level of co-management for each of those case studies using the Sen and Nielsen classification, which identifies 5 types of co-management, from 1 instructive, 2 consultative, 3 cooperative, which is 50%, will be the equal government and fishers, 4 advisory, and 5 informative. And then I also look per case study for the main problems of the fishery and the data that is available. So now I'm going to show you the levels of co-management I found for the fishery across Europe and some examples of how co-management is related to a more sustainable resource use. So the first level, instructive, I found it in 2 places in Portugal. Here there's a one-way flow of information. There are mechanisms for the administration to talk with the fishers, but they are not used. The second level of co-management will be consultative. Here we have a two-way flow of information. We find this in the east of Asturias, Basque Country, and in 2 places of Portugal. Here the fishers, they have the opportunity to be heard, but still the government takes all the decisions and is under no obligation to take fishers' opinions into account. And then we also found a higher co-management level, which is more than consultative, but is not yet cooperative, because it's not really on an equal basis. So the fishers, they actively participate in the decision-making process, but it's not really on an equal basis, as the administration is the one who has the last word. And we find this in Galicia, Asturias, and in Brittany. So the main problems across all regions for the fishery are the competition among the fleets, poaching, and the lack of data. But we find that higher co-managed areas, they present major advantages to overcome these challenges. So an example would be, for example, the competition between the recreational and the professional harvest, which happens mainly in Portugal. And in instructive areas, they don't really have any mechanism to reduce the conflict. But in consultative areas, we find that, for example, they have some zones that are separated for the different harvesters, so that alleviates the conflict. And even in higher co-managed areas like Galicia, here the competition is between on-foot and on-boat harvesters. But here the problem is practically solved because the high co-management enables the development of different exploitation plans, not only with separate areas, but also different quotas, different calendars to meet each fleet objectives. So actually the conflict is practically solved. In low co-managed areas, to reduce poaching, they only focus on the presence of guards to detect illegal activities. But in higher co-managed areas, they stimulate fishers. They provide incentives to fishers for voluntary compliance. And this sense of entitlement of the fishers makes them participate in monitoring and surveillance activities, and also makes them carry out strategies that require a high level of cooperation, such as rotation among the harvesting areas, which we don't see in any of the low co-managed case studies. And also, a higher co-management, we see that for the barnacle fishery, it promotes the collection of data. So in higher co-managed areas, we do find a lot more data. And this data I am currently working, I'm currently standardizing the data and analyzing it. So the take-home message of my presentation is that across the distribution area for species, we can see that higher co-managed areas, they promote voluntary compliance, they promote the collection of data, they increase the diversity of knowledge for problem solving. So all of this increases the ability to deal with complexity.
Interesting talk about barnacles I have ever seen. Anyway, any question? Yes? One.
That was a great presentation. Drawings are amazing.
Thank you.
Do you think that higher levels of co-management also lead to better strategies when dealing with external pressures, like a buyer, for example, an international buyer?
Like a what?
A buyer, like can they negotiate better prices, for example, when they are in a more...
Like a buyer, like comprador. Yeah, well, I haven't looked at this, so I can't really tell you exactly. But I feel that yes, because higher co-management promotes this more cooperation between the fishers. It seems like they are more united. So I think it also helps them to, it provides resilience to external drivers as well as for example, what you are saying. Yes.
That will be chapter 2 of the thesis. Anybody else? Okay, now, is that the end of the group 1?
Yes.
Okay, you want to take a pause because you need to check? I don't know, what about Melinda? Is Melinda here? Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Go, Mel.
That's good.
Oh, no. Have you checked that presentation? Okay, so the second group, is that the question, Miguel, whether we have all the talks for the second group? Is that the issue? We can do that now. And see.
Just for a second group now.
Yeah, I mean, Melinda can be the next second group. No. Oh, cutting the flow. We're just having fun. Well, that's right. She's going to be in the second group. Okay, so let's take a few breaks. So Melinda, and then it might help to have a book. Can I just, thank you. So it's Melinda, Sergio? Is your talk in there?
Yes, I think so.
Nice.
I hope.
And Jerry, and Koite?
Joe.
Joe.
Yes.
That's very kind of you, Joe. Okay. And then Anna Carolina, yes? And Evan. Oh, he was here. Evan. Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have all 6 now? Good to go? And the live stream is still on?
Yep.
Okay.
We are all famous immediately.
We are. People, what do? They do like today? How many viewers we have now? Like,
I don't know exactly.
well,
But like,
must be like
all of us
10,000.
here are the presenters also. If you want to check your presentation again, just go to TVTI Media, the name of the YouTube channel, and you have like, we're going to have the video there as well, and also all of the other live stream pattern.
Tomorrow, could you put it in the slides so that we can
Yes.
present that in terms of how to find us?
I can do that.
Yeah. Good. Mel, are you ready? Where did she go? It's in this room, the presentation.
Oh, I thought it's you first.
No.
Are you ready? Are you ready for the next one? Are you ready for the next one?
Yeah.
I'm not. So my name is Melinda. I work for TV Creek North. So here, is it true that small-scale fishing has smaller impacts? So we know that one of the oldest problems now is overfishing, and it's just because there are too many fishing gears out there. And it's just not just about overfishing, it's also about bycatch that we're having trouble with this time because there's too many gears out there. So it is good to look at this gears and assess them so that if we know this information, we will be able to manage the fisheries. And that's the goal, the motivation behind this research. Each one of us here, I'm pretty sure, has interest in fishing, particularly small-scale fisheries. So again, I'm going to go back to that question. Do we think because we are small-scale, or we do small-scale fishing, does that mean smaller footprints? So we'll see if you're able to answer that today. So sometimes it's so good to think about reference points. You know, when we see bigger trawls, we would think that they would have bigger impacts, not only in the habitat damage, but also in overfishing as a whole. So here, aside from the size, it's also very important to look at the different methods or different operation that we use when it comes to fishing. And of course, those operations would have something to do with the type of gears that we use. So as you can see, this is very varied, and so it makes sense to assess the impacts of each of those. As of now, we have pretty good information, relatively, as to the impacts of the large-scale fishing, large-scale fishing gears, but not so much of the SSF fishing gears, and that is one of the gaps that we think is needed to be filled, and that's one of the purpose of the study. So we all comes up to that question: how do we assess the impacts of fishing gears? Well, for us, we started with whatever is available information, and since we know that large-scale fishing has more information than LSF, we started right there. So we've looked at the two publications that are we have today. These two studies are very comprehensive. One of them was recently done in Canada, so it's both the East Coast and the West Coast, and also the United States. So this study have used a method that is found very good method, and for that reason we use the same method. But another another reason why we're using that method is because we want to make sure that our results could be comparable to the results from this study. See? I talk faster. Okay, so to do that, we sent out a survey, a rapid survey, asking people to rate the impacts of fishing gears. And we had this workshop that we did a couple years ago, and it's representing 11 countries. And from these experts, they're basically experts because they know exactly what the impacts of these fishing gears. We asked them to look at the impacts of fishing gears from these many different species that you can see on the right, on the left, as well as the impacts of those gears in the ghost fishing. And to make it simple, it looks very simple, but it's not that simple. We asked the experts to rate the impact using this scheme. So from no impact to a very high impact. Okay, so this is our initial result. So from these you can see that on the vertical axis, these are the different species that the gears on the horizontal axis were assessed. Like what's the impact of these gears to those factors? And those are the results. In here you're looking at the published results from the Canadian study. So you can see the bottom trawl has the highest impact on the ecological impact, and then the harpoon is the least impact. Now, we wanted to see how the small-scale fishing gears place in that ranking scheme. And as you can see, these are just some of the examples of the gears that we assessed, and we can see that they're pretty much low impact compared to most of the large-scale fishing gears that you can see in the published study. So, going back to the question, small-scale fishing, does it mean smaller footprints? Well, partly we can say that based on that result, when you just look at the gear impact alone, then we can say that partly yes, it is. But as we know, small-scale fisheries is very diverse, it's complex. So there could be many other questions that could come out. Like there could be many SSF gears out there. So that's a different level of question that would actually come up with the final answer to our original question. So having that, okay, having that, we wanted to scale the study, scale it up. So as you can see, those black dots, those are the ones where we had our expert surveys existing now, and then those red ones are the gaps. So if you're from that location, you think you can help us with the information, and you can join us, we would love to have you on board. And if you really contribute, you would be our co-authors of that publication. And we do recognize that you guys underground have a lot of very good information, and so we hope that we put that into good use by hopefully sharing and connecting with us.
Okay, question for Mel or contribution?
Yes, contribution.
No? All right, well, more convincing is needed. Thank you. Next. Next is Sergio.
More technology to you, eh? How can I use it? Let's see. Ooh. Oh, no, fuck. Okay. Okay. It's working. No. Sam's problem is this.
All right. Okay. This part?
No, it's not working.
You know that you're live, you are on live, YouTube live, yeah? You recognize that. And your family is watching. In fact, your son is here, so could you start behaving?
Hello.
This is the problem. Thank you. Okay, go on. Okay, this is part of a research project that we have at the Research Group of Marine Tropical Ecology at Federal University of Pernambuco. I'm part of. I'm just the presenter. There's the team. So, Decline of Professional Artisanal Fisher in Rio Formoso, a historical contextualization in Brazil. It's not working? Okay. This is some of the feelings that the fishers have of their area. There's a lot of slang, there's environmental issues. It's a very good place to live. All the things that they feel about. The one that I like most is the last one. I don't live here for nothing, only upward to heaven. Okay? Well, fishing association in Brazil is started a very big issue because it was found from the Brazilian Navy. So they have many fishing associations experiencing negative impact on these organizations' social political characteristics. So this is the area. We conduct this evaluation is from 2012 to 2013. This is located in the southern coast of the state of Pernambuco. And it's a very rich environment and very diverse. This is a mangrove. No, okay. In 1960, we start discussing with the Fishing Association. The government started discussion about modernization, but the result was, of course, industrialization and the decline of abundance of fishers, disintegration of fishing community, and impoverishment of their communities. This is the result. The modernization plan led to an accelerated and ungoverned exploitation of fishing resources. So this is a command and control failure. So this doesn't work at all in some fishing communities, very poor fishing communities in Brazil. You can see the results in this implementation of fishing policies. This is what we found very, very often in Brazil. This is a small hill. This is clam shells. So the fishers construct their very humble house in the hills of clam shells. Okay, and close to smaller cities. So this continued policy toward fishing industry subsidies in parallel of tourism developed programs that triggered investment in coastal and created unfair competition. So fishers are being pushed outside of their previous and traditional fishing places. This is one of very important issues that we have. Clam fisherwomen have many illness, especially back injuries and genital problems because they fish all the times wet. And this is some of the fishing resorts started over there. Mussel, that's Kosururu, mullet, tainha, blue crab, siriri, and oyster. Of course, that's very rich and diverse ecosystems, but that's the main fishing resort started in this place. So civil society organizations raised their voice against this unsustainability created by the government institutional and legal framework. And they start recovering the fishing history, reviewing fishing association and communities' roles. This is important to see. That's only 5 men in this meeting. Also, they complain that unclearness of Brazilian institutional and legal framework comprise fishing policy effectiveness, but also upsetting, confusing, discouraging fishers to stay attuned of all these complexities about fishing policies. So this is also a result of what we found in this place. because we have predatory fishing, increasing fishing effort, the dumping of pollutants from sugar cane in shrimp farms, the inadequate disposal of solid waste. You can see here many garbage, and destruction of fishing resources. For fishers, this is very interesting phrase that they do. Animals are decreasing and are fished less and less. So in this area, 2 marine protected areas were created, but it is not well implemented at all. And we can see that in as much we can observe that in a socioeconomic point of view, fisherwomen play an important role in this area, and their kids fish with her since childhood. That's a very important socioeconomic issue we have. But, of course, they are very concerned about small-scale fishery culture that pass from generations. That is a family, this father and 2 sons that go fishing. This is often seen in this place to defend their culture. And one concern is this, in this aspect, that a fisher profession, they don't have the interest to continue. The generations don't pass the ideas to the importance of fisheries. So parents disencouraged due to decline of fishing resources. So tourism is other drive of change rapidly developed in the Northeast region, and community cultural economies and environment have also witnessed a rapid transformation. So this is a tourist area now because fishing activities is declining. No? Okay. So we can see here that we can find very big tourist boat. So although this is a concern for the elderly fishers, this is an issue raised by the young generation. So they think that a community-based tourism can be developed over there. So the future, the children of this community is to interact and to integrate 3 aspects: the environmental, the social, the economic, and the fishing policies to turn the small-scale fisheries viable. Thank you very much.
Let's close. Anyway, okay, a question for Sergio? Anyone? Where's Felipe? Felipe, you got a question for your father? He's the first author. Okay, no? All right. Jerry, okay, thank you. Next up is Daria. You win the custom for sure. Nice.
Yeah, it means I'm from Thailand, but today I'm going to present something about Myanmar. So, I am from Southeast Asian Fishery Development Center. Some of you know SIPTEC. We have the research support by Sweden project and between SIPTEC and Fishery Officer of Myanmar on understanding the gender dynamic in fishery value chain and marketing in Myanmar. So I would like to give you the background of this study. For this study, our project would like to initiate the gender integration in fishery development project in our Southeast Asian country. That's why we start by understanding the gender role of women and men in fishery. We have 3 areas as you see in previous map in Kaotong, Myanmar, in Gap, Cambodia, and in Tra. Today I will focus on the result of the Pulong Tonton, Kaotong, Myanmar. In Pulong Tonton they have 1,000 fishing households and 80% are fishermen. For this research, we have we can say that we have three steps of our methodology. For the first one, we have the planning meeting with DOF Myanmar to discuss about work plan and refining our questionnaire. And that time also we have the pre-test on data collecting, and we do the data collecting for two topics for the fishing household and fish marketing in Pulau Tonton. For fishing household, we can interview 80 respondents from about 800 fishing household, and for fishermen, we can interview 5 middlemen and 5 middle women, it means 10 of them. So, and then when we do the data analysis, we come back to the fishing village again to validate the data with the stakeholder, with 49 stakeholders, 27 men and 22 women. This is the result from the fishing in Pulau Tonton. We can find 6 main fishing gear here, and fishing can do whole year round, and most of them stay at the sea about 20 days. And that's why for the fish marketing, we have 3 types of the fish marketing. For the A and B type, they will participate by women and men and sell in the land. And another type they sell, they call carrier boat. The boat will pick up fish at the sea and sell to Thailand, Illinois. And here is the role of women and men in Pulau Tonton village. And this one, you can see that everywhere in the world that women will be work mostly in household chore, and men work for the some hard work. And this one for role of women and men in fishery activity. And you can see that the women and men more is balanced in the market work, and women high in fish processing, and sure that here men more work in the fishing at sea. And this picture just would like to confirm you that when we observe along the fishing village, we found that women and men participate in our fishery value chain. You can see that they have. And here is the role of women and men in fishing activities. That I would like to summarize to you through this 4 categories on fish, pre-fishing, fishing, fish processing, and trading. For the first one, pre-fishing, you can see in here, women prepare food and ingredients while men prepare fishing gear and boat. It means both of them work together before fishing. And there's something that they say do is before they go to fishing, they have to some pray for fishing, because in here, and you can see that they have long time fishing at sea. And for fishing, no women participate in fishing at sea at all. And for men, they do fishing at the sea. And because they have to stay a long time, they can cook at sea by themselves. And for fish processing, inland, yes, women do sorting, cutting, drying, and make shrimp heads. The picture that I saw you, or dry fish. And men, they can sort, unload, transport, and dry fish for their eating at sea. They can do that. And trading, women sell fish at local market in Pulau Tonton and in Katong Township, and men sell fish at sea. Yes, you can see that from the fish value chain that they have some activity between men and women. Our gender analysis summarize that gender role is different based on characteristics of the work, because women can do everything in the land and men can do everything in the fish because they go to fishing. And also they have strong stereotype on gender division of labor here, that women will do household chore and men will do the hard work. And our study would like to recommend for this area that if possible, that if we can have the appropriate intervention to promote or empower women in this area, because women in this area, they always stay at home for a long time, and we think that we can have some job opportunity for them in this area to strengthen their income in this fishing village. And also, if you can see in the map that I show you, this area is in the sea, so we need more study about the vulnerable for climate change in this area. So I would like to say thank you again for the support and kind cooperation from Myanmar direct staff, and also thank you for Myanmar villager who give us information, and thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Any question? Oh no, I have one. I mean, what? No, wait. I have a question for you. Why is it that men can cook when they're at sea, but not when they're on land?
Something like this. We feel that why when in the sea they can cook. When we asking this, they stay at sea long time. When they come at home, they have only one week. They would like to rest, to talk with friends. That's why they said let the women do their own job. They already know.
Who's next? I never have a list. I lost my list. Who's next?
Yeah, I am.
Yes, of course, Joe. You're next.
Yes.
Please.
Before the presentation starts,
hello? Yes, before the presentation starts, I'm going to present the vulnerable study, but I'm particularly remind you that I'm particularly vulnerable to 3 shocks. One is technology, very advanced, and the rule-based presentation, and the smart audience and the chair.
That's one thing I cannot do. I cannot leave the room. So you might as well start and stop this.
Okay.
Get going.
So I have 3 questions.
Is this a start?
It's a start. Yeah, I have only 15 slides, but I have 3 questions. Yeah. Is there anybody feel now by yourself, feel vulnerable? Raise your hand in this room, current position. What about if it would have been already announced in this hotel that there will be a big flood coming and destroy everything? More. What about if you're alone? And more raising hand. Okay. So this particular 2 things that we actually identify, therefore, all people are vulnerable, but not all the people are vulnerable people are poor. We look at the vulnerability in the context of how people are exposed to hazard and how those activities are actually influence the way that how people are able to cope with that. So we look at that 2 dimensions by using people forgotten very easy simple framework, livelihood, sustainable livelihood framework, to be able to analyze how these all vulnerable contexts in ERD, which is actually a range of natural threats, and there are institutional causes for over-extraction, exploitation, and there has been, you must have already heard the Nagi's impact. So this is a study site. We choose 5 areas, particularly to help World Fish and all the development partners to be able to understand how their interventions can improve, to be able to improve social protection and reduce poverty. So that is a particular site that you can see all 5 pinpoints by using the very innovative participatory tools, but not just only a kind of normal PI tools. We innovate by using traditional PI tools, but we also innovate to be able to use the angle of political economy by understanding structure and by understanding agency and the rule-based society, particularly at the village level, how we can understand the way that how the resource exists, the way that how people interact, the way that how the vulnerability shocks actually come to them. As I already identified, the different is condition is very different because where they are and how they are. So we look at the way that how each of the livelihood framework, particularly physical capital and natural capital and human resource capital, financial and also the physical capital, how people have already that have a power of resilience by scoring them into 5 and reducing down into their coping mechanism, how those shocks come. This is just an example how we look at individual and each human capital and how much they have already capability in terms of those 5 capitals, and also how the shocks are coming to them and how different to each society. Then we actually look at the lower vulnerability, high resilience. Of course, the larger the footprint, the lower vulnerability. And we also look at how the shape of the livelihood capital by scoring that into 1 to 5. And then also look at high vulnerability, low resilience in terms of each level of one family members and also household, and also how they are different in terms of when they fish alone or when they fish in group. Particularly also look at the angle of the community fishing, which has been already introduced by a lot of civil society organizations and also private sector to be able to look at the differences between the tender-driven fishery and also how the community fishery has been different. So these are the 3 major shocks we identify. Of course, the fishery access is very important, which is not just only about livelihood, it's also about their social capital and how they actually have use those assets in terms of able to cope their livelihood mechanism as well. So particularly the condition where they are is very important. These 2 villages particularly are most vulnerable because they are very prone to shock because they are actually located in the very close sea mouth area. Therefore, this is also one of the conditions we identify in terms of where they are. Of course, there is always gender disparity in this kind of society, particularly because of the patriarchy social structure and also cultural norms make most female-headed household families are more vulnerable. And there is also lack of social protection mechanism because there is no financial institution that allow them to be able to even access to credit. These are the current coming up climate change. People are really dependent on the natural resources, particularly fishing grounds. Seasonal shocks are more difficult to predict. So more and more frequent tide and drought and everything is actually pressing down to the nature. Therefore, we recommend very comprehensive and understanding and also through the intervention of the different stakeholders. And 2 further research are actually recommended, climate change and socio-economic impact, to be able to understand so that intervention can improve better. Thank you very much.
Okay, question? Yes, please. Okay, 1, 2, go ahead.
Yes. To what extent were the, should I get the microphone or?
Yeah, sorry.
Sure, why not? Forgot that we're streaming. Hi, thank you for your presentation. To what extent were community members involved in assigning the factors of each of those 5 capitals and how the indicators were scored?
So how each individual is different to the way that how they are in group, or is that a question?
Just how much the participants you worked with were engaged in deciding how to score the 5 capitals.
Very good question. Thank you.
You're going to answer?
Maybe I will take all the
Oh,
questions and then-
sure, that's fine. But can you stay a little bit closer to the screen because you are actually off the video. Thank you.
Sure, great. Thank you for your presentation. I would just ask you if you can briefly redefine vulnerability in the context of the situation. Just what definition are you using for that? And then for the major shocks, I know that you talked very briefly about access, but climate change was another one, and there was a third. If you could go over that in a bit more detail, that'd be great.
Any more questions?
Okay, I will start with the very good questions about in terms of how we define those goals, right? We actually bring the different participatory groups, so thanks to Network Activity Group and also the feed chain that actually go down and facilitate the group by explaining how these scores is about, and also they participate and they define in terms of each capital, for example, human resource. We actually have a very sub-level indicators that we cannot, since we don't have time. So for example, so whether they have experience of fishing. So then they have to define by themselves which score they are in. So then also in terms of looking at resource, whether they have fishing license every year, and what does it actually mean to that score. So we actually discuss with the group of people by explaining the tools, and then they actually define those scores. The second question is actually about, okay, third dynamics.
I have two questions. One is about the definition of vulnerability. The second was going over the three major shocks defined in terms of access, conflict, and there's one more that I missed.
Okay. Firstly, I think in terms of vulnerability context, we define is a kind of general definition of how people are able to expose to their risk and then how much they are capable. So if you are not capable, for example, as we ask the questions about, for example, in a normal condition, so the vulnerability context is very low. But as soon as there's a shock coming, like I asked, so when the flood is coming, and that will actually press down all the condition of the capability for people to be able to cope with the hazard. So then we look at that two dimensions, how much you are capable to resist, and how much the shocks are coming, external and internal shock. That is the way that how we define the vulnerability. The third condition in that area is particularly one is the natural resources. The climate change is actually making people confused. So the third area is actually, so when they are alone and they are able to cope with that, so particularly the community fishery is really helping them to be able to get access to fishery resources. That also build their social capital. That social capital is actually enhance the ability to be able to cope with any of the existing shocks. For example, even in the disaster conditions, if they have already organized society, that also we found out during the Nagi cyclone, if people, the community which are more organized are able to cope the external shocks. But at the same time, in terms of also getting access to fishery, currently we just enacted the law that include community fishery sessions to allow the community to get access directly to the fishery without calling tender if it is under the 40 lakh check, so which is probably about $3,000. Does it answer your questions? And then the community, whether they are alone or in a group, yeah, social capital, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we just have two more to go. The speakers would be great. This is coming up with Anna Carolina. So it would be good if you try to stay not too far from the screen. You might be better off on the other side if you don't mind. It's not gonna ruin. Is that better now? Yes. Okay. Perfect. Whenever you're ready.
So good afternoon, everyone. I am Ana Carolina. I'm from Brazil and currently pursuing a PhD at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And my presentation today focuses on coastal systems contributions to fishing communities' well-being in a broader perspective, and how this understanding can help us deal with conflicts in marine protected areas that in Brazil are created by the government, national, state, or municipal level, with this historical approach, top-down approach, not always, but this is how it is being, and in many situations discounting the pre-existence of human communities that live in those areas, with still this idea of pristine nature. And if you look at this picture, you can tell that maybe there's not human activities going on there, there are not people living in marine areas, but the situation is not that. And conservation approaches, they focus a lot on ecological aspects of the area, and they undermine many social aspects that are going on in this area. And if you zoom in, for instance, there are many communities that live all around the coast, and they have their different and unique types of uses from these areas. They have their livelihoods, and they are specific according to different communities and traditional peoples. And they use these areas not only as a source of income and to secure food, but also coastal environments. They are environments that enables distinguished types of social interactions and relation among people within a community. And this also relates to their sense of being. And here are some examples of Brazilian traditional peoples. Caiçara people, they're descended from Europeans and Africans and indigenous people from Brazil. They live in the south and southeast coast based on small-scale fisheries. Quilombola people that are descended from slavery periods, those that could escape from slavery, and they used to live hidden in the forests. And we also have different ethnic groups of indigenous people, and all of them, they live in this unique relationship with nature. And they differ, and they have their own ways to deal with marine protected areas as well. And some gaps that we can identify when thinking about marine protected areas, that they lack this inclusion of social and subjective well-being of those communities, and there is also a need for adaptation on current rules that are based on input from the bottom up, so what these communities have to say. And the idea of this research is actually to give a voice for those communities through this photo voice method. So I asked them to take pictures of the local ecosystem that contribute to their well-being in this broader sense. And so I'll focus here on some quotations and discuss a little bit about that in one of my case studies. That is Puruba Beach community in the southeast coast of Brazil, São Paulo state. And here's the community. They live pretty close to the forest. There's a river right in front, and then the beach. And all these different ecosystems, they contribute to their well-being in these different dimensions: material, subjective, and social. So when you look at this, and it captures your attention, it's because you feel good. When you see this beauty, you feel in peace. And this was what a senior male fisher was talking about when he sees these different landscapes, specifically this one with So another fisher that I was talking with, adult and male fisher, he was telling me about the sunset when he goes to fish, that going out fishing allows you to see this. Fishing is a mental hygiene. It helps to forget all concerns and negative thoughts one may have. The third one was the son of a fisherman, and he was telling me about his family and the experience he has with this environment. I can take different photos, but they all represent the environment where I was born and raised. My individual freedom and the feeling to be close to God. And I was talking also with women in the community, and specifically this wife of one of the fishers, she was telling me about the connection between the community, between themselves and the environment. Nature represents everything to us: the sea, the forest, the river, the human beings interconnected. Whatever you do for nature, you're doing for yourself. And also, the daughter of one of the fishers was telling me about her family and their cultural values and how trust, sharing, and the sense of community is very strong for them. And here you can see mullet fish. They're drying the sun with salt. And finally, another male senior fisher was talking about how it is important for him to live in that community that he will never leave. And is also close to what another presenter was telling today, also in Brazil, but in a different context. And although all this connection and this in different dimensions, the top-down policies, they are restricting livelihoods in many of those communities. And these restrictions deal directly with their livelihoods, and they are resulting in a forced urbanization in many of those communities. And this has many negative implications for the community. And I highlight some here: the appreciation of local culture, decrease the sense of community, and it's also reinforcing inequity and enhancing local competition with a strong focus on material well-being in these communities. And to change this scenario, we need to recognize that small-scale fisheries as a means of cultural reproduction and also an important way for social relations in marine protected areas as well. And fisheries, they are also partners in the conservation process, so they have to be recognized as an opportunity for conservation as well. In addition to that, we have to recognize that there are many current and effective strategies in place. and we need to adapt them. And in order to do so, we have to revise from our regulations and to recognize the diversity of values that we can find in each of these communities. Thank you.
So, all right, any question for Rebecca? No? Oh, one? Yes, go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, you're interesting. I was just wondering, so about the pictures, how did it work, like with the methods? Did you give the fishermen a camera and they took a picture and they told you, like, or they said something? You can explain that a bit further.
I had some cameras in case they needed, but most of them, they have cell phones, so they can just take picture from their cell phones. And I told them very broad task. So take a picture of any natural aspect of the community that represents your well-being of living there, your happiness, or anything related to that. And then they took the pictures, and after that we discussed about the pictures. And then I just, from our discussion, I picked some main quotes, and then I used here in this presentation, if that's clear.
Last but not least, we now have again the clip mic. So it's Evan is being equipped.
So, I'm equipped. I'm geared up. I'm going to try to put this in my pocket first before I start. Okay, I'm ready, Jack. My name is Evan Andrews. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And today I'm going to make the case for the weak capacity to govern change as one of the most important challenges for the future of small-scale fisheries. And I'm going to propose to you a type of transdisciplinary human behavioral research as one important scientific pathway to strengthening governability. And to make my case, I'm going to take you and the scientific literature to Newfoundland and Labrador, which is on the Atlantic coast in Canada. And this is a very interesting place, a site where fishers and coastal communities have experienced dramatic changes, including a very famous collapse of a 300-year-old cod fishery in the early 90s. Perhaps less famous marine crises in subsequent years. And now an impending potential collapse of the shellfish industry. And so why can't we govern change? Why does this keep happening? And part of the answer is because we've got global drivers of change that are perhaps outside the scope of fisheries management. And the other answer lies in the human experience and in governance. And I learned the first principle in 1993 in my first and final harvest, inland harvest, where that poor northern pike died. And I realized, hey, no one can catch this fish again. And when you apply this principle in a commercial harvest, where exploitation rates outpace renewal rates, you get a zero-sum game in fisheries. And when things aren't looking very good, it creates dramatic behavioral cascading responses in fisheries and coastal communities. And that's very difficult. When making matters worse is that we can't govern it because no one has access to the full system knowledge. No one really knows. And so the best thing we've done in many formal governance arrangements is managers, ministers, and politicians get together, take a budget and plan, and invest on what type of change they want to govern and how they're going to do it. And this is a very classic response, which is to cut up the sea into manageable pieces, invest in sophisticated natural science, and when it comes time to plan, it's to try to integrate it all back again and maybe consult with some people when the decision is taken. And so what you get is a very grim picture of governance and governability, and rules and rulemaking systems that are consistently contested, relationships suffering, and ultimately we have a phenomenon where small-scale fisheries consistently lose out. And I'm sorry to say, but this is a pattern by design. In policy processes that you'll recognize here as the Integrated Fisheries Management Framework, and you can put all the consultation and social science around this, and subsequent versions of this framework have. But at the end of the day, in practice, all that contextually sensitive social science stuff we need to know about people gets filtered through an ideological trinity where economic problem definitions prevail, technical solutions are the only ones proposed, and we have governance in the gospel of efficiency. And this is a really big problem for small-scale fisheries that have diverse interests. Because this diversity in models and policy is aggregated. And that stuff that doesn't fit in those models and policies gets stuck in a black hole called context. And we don't really know what to do with it. And I'm sorry to say that if during this week and our subsequent research, we continue to support without critique these three ideological assumptions, we're not walking the talk of diverse small-scale fisheries. We're walking the talk of the assumptions of privatization, which is a really big problem. But I have a little bit of hope for you. And that is a new frontier of transdisciplinary research about human behavior that's occurring all over the world. Lots of people working with mixed methods in policy-oriented research, except there's a lot of disagreement among these folks trying to work together about what it really means to experience change. What's in the psychology of fishing? And that's really difficult. And another sort of slight problem is that the human behavior that they're really looking at is that short-term immediate behavior, adapted effort, compliance, which is complicated, but it doesn't fully describe all the behaviors necessary to understand for the future of small-scale fisheries. Exiting the fishery, out-migration. In particular in Newfoundland during these marine crises, out-migration is a really big problem. You have small rural communities of 200, 300 people, and you see that now they have less. Population 77 sometimes. And why is this sort of funny? The problem is they're way below a social threshold to exist to support a fun, full life with a glowing local economy. And so my research is just to bring it back to the basics of what it means to be human and do fishing. And I looked at values and emotions as a driver of those long-term behaviors. And what I've found so far is that hope has a lot to do with it. So hope, while keeping people in a fishery, also delays their responses in getting out, which creates a really diverse framework that we're not sure how to manage yet. And so that's my next job, is to figure out how to make a policy process that goes beyond this and into those longer term behaviors. And so to sum up, I've got three cross-cutting insights that correspond with our questions for this conference. What is the major challenge facing small-scale fisheries? I say it's weak governability, and I haven't heard that term here. What we need is contextual social science knowledge in a realistic policy process that can take it. And what I'm going to do to try to strengthen it is have transdisciplinary human behavioral research. Thank you.
Okay, that's at the last talk. Any question for Evan? Oh, come on.
Yeah.
So,
This isn't a softball. We don't want to do it a little bit. Okay, go.
So how are you planning to analyze the influence of values in human behavior? How are you making this connection with one drives the other?
So, well, what I've done is some storytelling methods with fishers. Met them multiple times. We sat down for hours, and we just started from when they grew up all the way to their plans for retirement, which, by the way, is to die in a fishing boat in most cases. And so we talked about those big changes. When did you move? Why did you come back? when were you forced to leave, why did you upgrade, and all these sort of things. And we just kept digging deeper into the real meaning behind what happened. And so it's a limited in its individual scope, but my goal is just to try to tease away at those fundamental assumptions. And the next step is to do the same thing with managers, to see if they'll talk about why they do the things they do, and to look at the policy context for that.
Yes, for that you might need to lock them up somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, is that it for Evan? Okay, Milena.
Can you do it to the scientists?
Yeah.
No, it's not. I'm not joking because scientists are also actors in government.
Well, I did, and not to embarrass anybody, but I did hear in a session yesterday where someone said, all you need to know is that fishers are driven by money, which is pretty problematic because they're really not. In most cases, some are, of course. If you take any job, people are there for the money, people are there to learn, people are there to show their skills. It's a diverse, values-oriented activity. And so yeah, that's all I can do other than try to yell at rooms of people like this and publish, I guess.
But at the end, I think you want to align those values. First, make them explicit. So these are my values. This is important for me. And then you try to align them with the other values, and then try to get trade-offs.
Maybe Milena is into ordering something of the world here.
So you need the other actors' values as well.
Yeah, I think that's important, and perhaps maybe fodder for a postdoc. Anybody's.
Alicia.
Amazing presentation. I really like your energy and passion when you speak about the issues of small-scale trees, but I have one small query. Why transdisciplinary human behavior? Why not, for example, transdisciplinary community well-being? Because you're dealing with fishing communities. So, yeah.
Well, that's a really good question. And the reason why I got into human behavioral research is these long-term responses that are couched as behavior in the scientific literature. And so I wanted to get after that. And really, when I'm talking with fishers, we're not talking about human behavior. We're talking about life stories. And the scientific lens where that I thought I could get a little traction is this human behavioral stuff, because we've got some big papers that have come out in the last 5 years saying that the greatest source of uncertainty in fisheries management is human behavior, and all sorts of stuff. So I wanted to really get in there. Perhaps it's an imperfect way to conceptualize that, but you know, it's a choice that I'll defend in a year and a half.
Right, okay, that's great. I like to, that's wonderful, Evan, thank you. Now I'd like to, we still have a few minutes left. I think we should bring all our speakers. A big, the big round of applause. But more than anything else, we have more questions for you. Aha. So we're just gonna grab the microphone here. Right. So seriously, would you ever do it again? Go there. Would you ever do it again? What this whole experience here, or this kind of presentation? Was it too painful? Was it fun? Just share with us the feeling.
I've never prepared so well for a presentation.
Ah,
That's what I check.
okay.
This was fun. It was a new challenge. I'll do it again, but not always.
Yeah, I will do it again. I think it helps you to come across, very direct and key messages. I think it's fun, and I will do it again.
100%. Feels like a race. When you go here, it's like start, and then go in your game. But it's a nice way to present it. Like it's a 5 minutes elevator pitch. That is a nice ability to have.
I think it's not a bad approach. It's just like a little bit different than what we do normally. So I think it's good.
Yeah, I think it's quite exciting, but before that, as I said, I was feeling a bit vulnerable to a new shot. But at the same time, it's quite a way also to bring respect between the audience and also presenter in terms of how we can also use the affected time, and at the same time, how you also use a key message to be able to deliver. I think that's quite fascinating. But as other people said, it's not all the time to do it.
Well, I just came out of the field, so it's certainly a really good way to get my butt in gear and try to synthesize and come up with those main messages.
I think I'm very good preparing with my script, very long 3 pages. And when I come to this room, I throw it and okay, be myself, talk everything that you think that you have to talk, and it's practice, very good practice for me. Thank you.
I'm really surprised actually. It came out, it was actually easier than I thought it would be. I had to practice a lot. I'm not sure if I mean, I have to compare with the sessions because I'm presenting again tomorrow in the speed session. So I will compare those and then see what, I mean, I quite miss like having control over the clicker, like to like to really like be in control of my presentation, kind of miss that. So let's see tomorrow. Yeah, I will compare both and then I'll decide.
Anyone has any other questions?
Well, it's not a question, but I just want to say as an audience member, I thought it was fantastic. I've got a really short attention span, but I actually listened to every word Audrey said.